We are live.
Hello and welcome to Live with ASI. Again, if you were here 2 minutes ago when we had a little technical issue, but we're back. He's Bassam Haddad. I'm MK Smith. We're covering the months of April and May.
And part of May.
And part of May.
And we are very happy to share with you our intro. And sorry about the glitch a minute ago.
We will be offering you the usual recommendations for Newton as well as our must-read selections today, as well as interviews covering issues ranging from the 10th anniversary of the Gezi protests in Turkey to the 75th anniversary of the Palestinian Nakba. Let's get to it.
First, we'll go over what's new in our New Text Out Now series. Jadaliya has put together 2 Newton bouquets which showcase a selection of texts dealing with the narratives, social histories, and cultural output of Palestinians during the ongoing Nakba. There is also a discussion with Marian Holmes Katz about her new book, Wives and Work, Islamic Law and Ethics Before Modernity, which engages feminist scholarship on Islamic law as well as the ethical turn in Islamic studies.
Also over at Newton, there is a discussion with Azad Essa about his new work, Hostile Homelands, the New Alliance Between India and Israel, about the growing political consensus and the relationship between the two states. Lastly, we recommend Matteo Capusso's Everyday Politics in the Libyan Arab Jamahiriya, which addresses the political turbulence that Libya has undergone in the past 2 decades, told from the perspective of Libyans. Definitely check out all of those conversations and book discussions at our New Text Out Now page on Jadaliya. And here we have them behind us. Okay, we are going to jump ahead.
I'd like to welcome our first guest, who is actually having trouble.
That's why I said we're going to jump ahead. Oh, okay.
Our first guest, who is signing on right now, Jadaliya co-editor and regular contributor to LWA and podcaster, genius and brain trust par excellence.
Muin, is that enough compliments for you?
No,
did we shower you with enough praise? Okay, he is also has wonderful hair, as you can see. It is well kept. He's also an intellectual and a kind person, and we'll now move on. Okay, so yeah. Well, welcome back, my friend. You have recently released 2 new episodes of Connections, both of which deal with the Nakba. Can you tell us a little bit about these conversations that you had and who they were with?
Sure. Actually, this month so far, we've had about 8 episodes of Connections. The first was with Helen Lackner on developments in Yemen and asking whether peace is on the verge of being achieved or not in that country's horrific war on the basis of recent developments. And subsequently, I had a long interview with Ibrahim Frehat, in which we looked specifically at the recent Saudi-Iranian normalization agreement and also what its regional and potential international implications are, and tied that also into the shifting geopolitics of the region. And then we had a total of 6 episodes on the Nakba, and I'll run through those very briefly. We began with Hiba Jamal speaking about the censorship of Palestinian voices in Germany, which is turning into an increasingly precarious situation for Palestinians seeking to express their views in that country. Subsequently, we spoke with Nader Hashemi of the University of Denver about a defamation campaign against him by the ADL, better known as the Defamation League, and which ultimately failed, but also discussed how he was effectively thrown under the bus by the university's own administration, primarily on the basis of fright and ignorance on their part. I then had a particularly interesting discussion with Josh Rubner about what Washington knew about the Nakba as it was unfolding in 1948, in which we also looked at the various policy positions that were adopted by the Truman administration during the events themselves and in their aftermath, and how Washington ultimately came to acquiesce in Israeli ethnic cleansing of Palestinians and so on, and how this kind of set a precedent for the way Washington has dealt with the question of Palestine in the decades since. This was followed by a lengthy discussion with three of my fellow editors of the Palestine page on Jadiliya, reflecting on 75 years of Nakba. And the final two episodes, we had one discussion specifically focused on the Palestinian refugee community in Syria with Nell Gabiam of Iowa State University, basically looking at a profile of this refugee community, what their experiences have been in Syria through its various governments, and then, of course, also looking at the consequences of that country's war and conflict during the past decade upon the Palestinian refugee community. And finally, a discussion with Fida Abdel Hadi, the deputy permanent representative of the state of Palestine to the United Nations in New York, focusing on the United Nations and the question of Palestine. So overall, it's been a busy month.
Thank you so much. Can you tell us a little bit more about the decision and the thinking behind convening the Palestine page editors for the roundtable discussion?
Well, it is the 75th annual commemoration of the Nakba, and we decided to do a roundtable in which each of the Jadiliya Palestine page editors was asked to provide their reflections on 75 years of Nakba. And that roundtable, along with a number of other articles, are all available on Jadiliya's website. And also we republished a whole series of Newton's book reviews on Jadiliya, specifically relating to Palestine and the Nakba. And in this context, we all thought it would be a good idea to have kind of a group discussion, if you will, a episode specifically bringing in several of the Palestine editors to discuss the meaning of 75 years of Nakba. What do we mean by concepts such as ongoing Nakba? How do each of
Can we
them
follow up?
see the future? Yes, I can't hear you, Bassam. I think you're muted.
Yes, we had a little bit of a glitch where I asked MK if she can follow up because we needed to bring in some images, and I realized as I was saying that the volume was on.
I see.
And that we asked a follow up question. So we need to follow up to our follow up.
No, actually, we can move forward. And I would like to say right now, staying on the topic of Palestine, we want to highlight an article that was recently published in Jadaliya titled "For Palestinians, the Local is the National," written by Diana Greenwald. Diana is an assistant professor of political science at the City of University of New York, and she joins us now. Welcome, Diana, and please, Moin, if you don't mind staying with us.
Sure.
Okay, let's bring in Diana. Ahlan wa sahlan, Diana.
Ahlan, Ahlan, hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi, thanks for joining us. Thank you. It's so great to have you on the show. Obviously, we've all read your piece, but we're hoping that you can fill in our audience a little bit, especially those who haven't had a chance to read the piece yet, to tell us a little bit about the article and what gave you the impetus to write it.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, it's great to be here. Bassam, I think I just missed you at Georgetown, actually. I was there till 2006, right after you. So it's nice to meet you virtually.
Very nice to meet you.
I was interested in writing this piece because I've been doing research on municipal politics in Palestine and in particular in the West Bank for what feels like a while. It was a PhD dissertation that I'm currently turning into a book that should be out with Columbia University Press next year. But I've been doing this research on kind of local governance while at the same time observing, what's been going on in the past couple of years or a few years in Palestine. These kind of two intersecting trends, I guess, where you had this really extremely far right Israeli government sworn in at the end of 2022, which made no secret about its intentions, of course, to violently annex and frankly ethnically cleanse the West Bank, but to do so without the existence of the Palestinian Authority anymore. And so, you had the finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich, saying things that, urging the PA to collapse and seeking to kind of reimpose direct military rule, really unmediated rule over Palestinians, over 3 million Palestinians in the West Bank. But at the same time, we have this trend in Palestine where, of course, the Palestinian Authority's legitimacy crisis is longstanding. And it always seems to be that we're talking about it being kind of on the precipice of collapse. But we observed really over the past 2 or 3 years with the mobilization in and around the Unity Intifada in 2021, the outrage against the PA's implication in the murder of Nizar Banat in Palestine, just really ground shifting Palestinian mobilization, and then eventually, when faced with direct Israeli raids into Palestinian cities, these kind of springing up of local militias to serve as defensive, coercive institutions in cities like Nablus, Jenin, etc. So we had these kind of two visions of what the localization of Palestinian politics would look like in the West Bank. We have the Jewish supremacist vision adopted by the Israeli government, and then we have what's really going on the ground in Palestinian towns and cities. And so I just thought to bring in this piece some of my research and some of what I've been looking at the municipal level in the West Bank for a while, not just in the cities of places like Nablus and Jenin and Khalil, but smaller towns and cities, Araba and Hawara and other places that that we maybe don't pay as much attention to normally, to see what localization of Palestinian struggle looks like, to Palestinians on the ground.
Thank you so much, Diana. And I'll pose this next question to both you and Muin, if you'd like to chime in as well, please. As many of us know, that this time of year always seems to feature an escalation of settler colonial violence against Palestinians. I'm curious if either of you have some thoughts with regards to how the situation might develop over the summer.
Go right ahead, Diana, after you.
I think we had just now the flag march that we always see, where Israeli settlers and kind of extremists are parading through Jerusalem. And there were attacks against Palestinians in how these marches are carried out. I don't know if we should expect, a major escalation in Gaza, for example, again, seeing as we're just coming off the heels of more Israeli strikes into Gaza. So I'm curious what you think. I mean, it's hard sometimes to detect escalation when it seems like there's kind of a constant state of threats to Palestinian security.
Well, I would agree. It's very difficult to predict what will happen in the next few weeks or next few months. But I think it's important to point out that we now have an Israeli government that is not only in line with its predecessors, committed to consolidating permanent control and ultimate annexation over the occupied territories in the West Bank in particular. And this, in and of itself, makes for, let's call it, a highly flammable situation. But this particular government, key members of which also believe they have a very apocalyptic vision, and they genuinely believe that the sooner there is an apocalyptic explosion, the better it will be for Israel to meet that strategic objective. So, whereas previous governments always had this illusion that they could achieve long-term stability by pursuing these annexationist policies, this government seems to take a different approach, which is to light as many matches as possible and throw them into the gasoline canister in the hope of producing exactly the type of explosion that we saw in Gaza very recently. So I would expect that it's really only a matter of time before we see much more of the same.
Thank you both so much for your insights and for joining us today. Maureen, I know. Yes, sir?
But yeah, before we go, I just wanted to point out that this Monday we'll have a special episode of Connections on Sudan. We spoke with Khalid Medani about a month ago, just as the war erupted. And this Monday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be speaking with Hamid Khalafallah and Khulud Khair, both of whom recently left Sudan, to get a better sense of what the situation is in that country at the present time.
Fantastic.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Looking forward to it, Maureen, and thank you for all your work on connections and other matters here at ASI. Thank you again, Diana, for your contribution, and we look to have you both back again. Maureen, you have no choice because you are going to be joining us as a guest at large starting the next episode.
Looking forward to it.
And good Diana, hopefully once your text is published, if not sooner.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Wonderful having you both.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Staying on the topic of Palestine, Bassem recorded an interview for the Flow podcast last month with the Israel and Palestine director at Human Rights Watch, Omar Shakir, regarding the growing consensus among human rights organizations regarding Israel-Palestine. The two met again this week to record this segment for ASI, which we have pre-recorded for you now.
Here you go. Good afternoon, Omar. How are you?
Good to see you, Bassem.
Always good to see you. I am very happy we're able to talk again. You and I had a conversation with you addressing the consensus on behalf of most human rights organizations on the question of Israel-Palestine and on the question of Israeli apartheid. And we'd love to hear from you your thoughts and reflections on that conversation, especially for those who were not able to make it.
Thanks, Bassem. I enjoyed the conversation a lot. I think it actually put into focus the kind of moment we're in where there's kind of two contrasting trends, right? On one hand, we're seeing a moment of unprecedented repression of Palestinians on the ground. I mean, we have decades long highs in the number of Palestinians held in administrative detention without trial or charge. We have decades-long highs in the killings of Palestinians in the West Bank. We see Palestinian human rights groups that have been outlawed. We see rounds of hostilities in Gaza. The situation couldn't be more stark than it is. But at the very same time, on the other side of the ledger, we're seeing this moment of consensus around Israel's apartheid against Palestinians, where more and more people with different backgrounds, with different mandates, are calling a spade, or identifying reality for what it is. That consensus spans Palestinian human rights organizations who have been calling it apartheid for years, if not decades. It now includes Israeli human rights organizations, 27 different groups that when the new government came to power used the term, big international human rights groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, the Harvard Law School, International Human Rights Clinic, UN experts, but it's even moved beyond the human rights community. Now you see senior Israeli government officials, former attorney generals, former director generals of the foreign ministry, and big names in the international scene, former UN secretary generals in entire states like South Africa, Namibia, Indonesia, Malaysia. It's it's quite a long list that we went through in our last conversation. But I think that this highlights the moment we're in, because we have this unprecedented opportunity that arises with the paradigm really shifting. And that's, not just in the consensus, it's also coming down to survey data that you read of public opinion in many parts of the world. But at the same moment, we have this moment of unprecedented challenge, particularly with this new Israeli government and some of the developments we're recently seeing in the occupied territory. So the challenges we're seeing now as a human rights movement is to continue to push for recognition of the reality on the ground as one of apartheid and grave human rights abuse, but then to translate that into concrete action on the ground. So I think our conversation, kind of showed the juxtaposition of these two things, how Human Rights Watch reached the apartheid determination, why it came down when it did, how and why others have made that conclusion, and the ways in which that presents opportunities, but also the ways in which it needs to obviously go further to actually changing realities on the ground.
Sorry. Thanks, Omar, for this. Is there anything else you'd like to add since we've had the conversation in terms of any sort of regional developments or local developments that might have provided any update as to what is going on, even though this is, clearly a decades-long ongoing situation? But is there anything you'd like to highlight that happened of late?
I would highlight that we had another round of hostilities in Gaza. So another period in which Israeli forces dropped explosive weapons, with wide area effects on the open air prison that is the Gaza Strip. So again, we saw, children killed. Again, we saw, Palestinian families who lost their homes, who lost members of their family. And it sort of reiterates that these cycles of bloodshed and repression will continue to repeat so long as we're not addressing the root causes, so long as we're not ensuring that impunity for serious abuse ends, so long as we're not actually dealing with the underlying issues like the closure of Gaza, the occupation, apartheid, the denial of right of return of refugees. We've also recently seen the 75th anniversary of the Nakba, a reminder that for this entire period, Palestinian refugees have been denied their right to return to their homes, a right that's enshrined under international law. And this denial takes place just as the Israeli government continues to allow Jewish Israelis from any part of the world, Jewish citizens of other countries from any part of the world to get on a flight, go to Israel, become citizens, while Palestinian refugees are denied this fundamental right under international law. So again, the recent anniversary of the Nakba, along with the recent round of hostilities, I think just again goes to highlight the underlying deep structural repression and the need to dismantle apartheid and address the structural barriers to human rights.
Thank you very much again, Omar. This was succinct, and I hope that we can have a succinct solution to the problem that we have been living with for decades in Palestine. Thank you for joining us again and for being so gracious and generous with your time. I hope to speak with you soon.
My pleasure. Thanks, Bassam.
Salam.
Bassam, I really like how you concluded that interview.
Why?
So you're like, in conclusion, I hope we find a solution. The end.
Okay.
You're saying what we were all thinking.
Okay.
But just in a very straightforward way.
Abdullah, Libby called twice. I have her twice, but I don't have her image. Okay. Given that she's next.
Poor Abdullah. We sit here from on top our high horse and we issue instructions.
Well, let me say that last month I also recorded an episode of the Theory Buzz podcast where I spoke with my co-host Libby Anchor about her new book, Ugly Freedoms. The book reckons. Wow.
Don't look at me. I didn't write it.
Did you write this?
It sounds fantastic.
That sounds good.
Sounds
It's
really
like
nice.
Muhammad style.
Well, you know.
Abdullah cannot believe that we're interrupting the podcast. He doesn't know what kind of operation this is. The book reckons with the complex legacy of freedom offered by liberal American democracy. In addition to being an author, Libby is also an associate professor of American Studies and Political Science at George Washington University, and she's here with us now. And I'm trying to bring her in. Welcome, Libby. Do we have you in audio and video or
Hi,
just
I'm
audio?
here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but we don't have your face.
Hmm.
Is your camera on?
My camera's on. Yeah.
All right. Well, you know what, Libby? Why don't we start the conversation and I will select a very charming picture from the internet and add it to your connection right here. In fact, you are now
All right.
officially.
That sounds great.
Look at you. Look at this. This is beautiful. Okay.
Wonderful. Hi, Libby. Welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
For a moment, I thought you refused to speak with MK because she's not me.
I think there must be some sort of delay. Apologies.
No worries,
problem.
no worries.
No problem. We would like to start off by asking you just generally about what inspired you to write this book during this political moment in the U.S.
You know, I started noting a lot of ways in which people were using the language of freedom as a way that seemed to me to incite violence. I mean, we certainly saw this in the War on Terror, which originally was described as a war for freedom against fear, as George W. Bush described it. And then both the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were called, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom for Afghanistan. And I started to question why so many people were using freedom as a way to justify these forms of neo-imperialist war, forms of state surveillance within the US. And once I started doing a little bit of digging, I realized that this use of freedom to justify war and oppression is not new and has been part of a long-standing history in the US since the moment of its founding. And that's what brought me to the study, to think about ways from both the past and the present that freedom has often been used as a cudgel against marginalized and minoritized people in order to justify brutality against them.
Libby, we have actually talked about a number of topics that kind of address many dimensions of your book, including our conversation with Wendy Brown, as well as our conversation with Mahmoud Mamdani. I'm wondering, is our podcast, which kind of is proceeding, but not at the pace that we had hoped, is our podcast? Do you feel converging around these issues because these are issues of the day? Can you say something about this before I do a follow-up question for Ugly Freedoms?
I do. You know, the way I understand the work of our podcast is to think about how people are rigorously examining from a political theory standpoint some of the most pressing problems of our day. So thinking about questions of settler colonialism in the present, as we saw with Mamdani, thinking about questions of the incredible violence of neoliberalism and what it does to, around the globe with Wendy Brown. And I think we are interested both in some of these really deep critiques, but also in people who are asking us to imagine a different world and to think about what that might look like, how we might reach beyond current ways of imagining incremental change or the status quo, to really ask us to press forward, to think about what a world would look like without all of these different oppressive and violent forms of power that kind of siphon the life and the freedom and the flourishing from the vast majority of people of the world to a small global elite.
Thanks, Libby. I want to ask you a question that we addressed in our conversation, and I will close with this because I know that you're on the road and you have been very gracious to join us. Can you just tell us quickly why, in your view, of course, why do you think we should focus more on small rather than large scale freedoms?
Well, I think whenever people try to imagine social change or what freedom might be, we often imagine really large scale social transformations, revolutionary actions, dramatic, eruptions of power that bring power back to the people, forms of heroic agency. And of course, I think those are important and they've happened throughout history. But oftentimes, when we think about how we live our daily lives, we often are, we are exhausted, we are tired, we don't necessarily feel that kind of, world historic heroism is necessarily at our fingertips. And I think without recognizing all the ways in which other more daily forms of freedom are available to us, that can leave us feeling powerless or inert or unable to change our world. When I actually think a lot of these much smaller, more mundane forms of freedom actually give us a much more robust capacity in our daily lives for practices of resistance, practices of world making that might otherwise fly under the radar, that we would miss when if we're only imagining that real freedom can be practiced at this heroic or world transformative capacity. So it's not that those are wrong, but that when those are the only visions that shape our imaginary, they leave us feeling much more powerless than we are to actually change the conditions of our lives for the better.
Great. Thank you so much, Libby. Thank you
Thanks,
for joining
Libby.
us. And a reminder to our audience that the interview itself will be linked in the episode digest and can be watched in its entirety to hear more of what Libby has to say about ugly freedoms.
Absolutely.
So much for having me.
Thank you, Libby. And you and I have a lot to do in terms of selecting our next crop of theorists and interesting individuals to interview.
I feel like we have a lot of great opportunities ahead of us. I can't wait for it.
Absolutely. And the world, the worse the world becomes, I think the better our podcast will become.
Yeah.
Well, that's encouraging. Talk about a silver lining.
Thank you, Libby.
Thank you, Libby.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Shifting now to a discussion on Turkey, specifically the 10-year anniversary of the Gezi Park protests, which, by the way, I should say, was the occasion for, I'm going off script, Abdullah, don't freak out, which, by the way, is the occasion for actually starting the Turkey page and amassing a number of stellar editors to run the page, most of whom are still with us today. Last month, in all cases, Turkey page contributors Birgan Gokmenoglu and Delia Ozkaya offered the first piece in a roundtable being produced by the editors of the Turkey page, reflecting on the protest of their aftermath. Delia Ozkaya, and I hope I'm pronouncing this properly, is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Graz, and she is here with us now. Welcome, Delia.
Hello, thank you very much.
I hope I didn't mispronounce your first name. Is Delia the way to do it?
Yeah, that's perfect. Daria. Yeah.
Daria, ahlan wa sahlan, Daria.
From Arabic and Persian, so it shouldn't be a
Absolutely.
problem.
I suspected, but I didn't want to offend you by saying it the Arabic way, which is my tendency as a good Arab. We are very excited to have you. Can you give us some context about the significance of this roundtable and the importance of continuing to study the events of 10 years ago?
Of course, thank you very much, first of all, inviting us. Unfortunately, my dear colleague and the co-editor of this roundtable discussion, Birgen Gökmenoglu, could not join us today because she's also traveling. But I will try to share our insights on behalf of her as well. So, as you already mentioned, Jadalia's Turkish page was also launched during just in the aftermath of the Gezi uprisings, and taking the 10th anniversary of the uprisings, we also wanted to somehow re-energize this page, looking back at the very unique and out of ordinary experiences of the Gezi uprisings 10 years on. And we both Birgen and I were already working on political mobilizations in Turkey and also urban movements post-Gezi, urban initiatives, and we were already thinking along the lines, what does it mean to remember the Gezi uprisings, especially in today's Turkey's political climate? What does it mean to remember it, and also to think about the political imaginations arose from these uprisings? And we invited many contributors to think along these lines, to produce some critical reflections on these out of ordinary moments, because as you also know, Gezi uprisings were very short-lived, but very significant moments in the history of contemporary political mobilizations in Turkey, as many other examples in the Middle East and North Africa during the last decade. And there are still very significant impacts in the domestic political realm, in the political organizations, political narratives, and discourses that you can trace. And these unique experiences of collective resistance still haunts not only the supporters and participants of the uprisings, but also the ruling regime itself. So we think that it's still very important to understand what has happened and also what kind of political imaginations these uprisings uh, inspired the political opposition to today's Turkey. But I also would like to emphasize that while doing this roundtable discussion, we uh, we are not aiming to reinvoke a kind of a romantic nostalgia around the so-called Gezi spirit, and we also aim to move beyond the dichotomies of failure or success, because in the existing literature so far, we see a kind of a tendency to either uncritically celebrate the Gezi uprisings or somehow belittle the political promises and inspirations of these mobilizations uh, emerge. But as an alternative, we want to revisit both the political promises and also contradictions and limitations that the political activists experiences during these mobilizations. So there will be some more critical reflections on both the uprisings and also the aftermath of them.
Thank you. And I know you just alluded to it a bit, but if you could unpack for us a little bit more about the potential direction of this work in the future.
Mm-hmm. So, as you also mentioned, we started the discussion with our introduction piece and also with Cihan Tual's critical analysis on the earthquakes, the recent earthquakes in Turkey. And there will be in total 20 contributions from researchers, scholars, political activists, and artists, particularly photographers and video archivists. And we will continue publishing these pieces, particularly starting from next week. And our readers will read these pieces from the political activists besides the scholars, because we also wanted to also include these experiences from the field themselves besides the scholarly explanations. And there will be also artists who will share their photographs and video archives with us. And what else? So this, as we already mentioned in our introductory piece, both these multi-disciplinary perspectives will also be contributed by different perspectives, interdisciplinary and also intersectional perspectives, from a class-based perspective and also from different ethnicities perspectives, will be also included in this critical analysis. And we thought that Jadalia is the perfect place for this because it also allows this multidisciplinary and intermediate contributions, and all the contributions will be multilingual, both English and Turkish. So we also try to reach a broader audience in both languages.
Amazing. Thank you so much. We definitely look forward to these future contributions just as much as we have enjoyed those that have already been made. And of course, we look forward to having you back on the show, hopefully, to further discuss these developments.
Thank you, Daria.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
We now have one more pre-recorded segment for you, this time featuring Iskender Sadeghi, who is senior lecturer in the Department of History at the University of York. Flo will be publishing an interview with him that Bassam and myself did recently in the UK, actually. However, they also met again this past week to discuss the interview and kind of tease it out. That is a horrendous photo of me. Thank you for
It's a
that.
good photo. It's a good photo.
Thank you. Woohoo!
And here's the
Okay.
announcement for the Monday podcast. This coming Monday on May 22nd at 12 p.m. we will be airing the interview live with Iskandar Sadige Boroujerdi, which we conducted and we were very happy with. Let's go now to the interview, after which stick around because we have some books that are must-reads that we would like to discuss with you. But right before that, there's some very special footage of the trip that I prepared without MK knowing. It's just like, a clip because we're not going to
Nervous.
over-represent this. And we look forward to continuing in just one moment. Here is Iskandar addressing lineages of protests in Iran. I can't find his name now. I actually,
So small.
yeah, for some reason it's not coming
Do you
up.
want me to pretend to be him and maybe... Hello.
Yalla, bye. Good afternoon, Omar. How are you?
Good to see you, Bassam.
Always good to see you. I am very happy we're able to again, even though he's Arab and when we're partial, we're actually going to go to Iskandar. Here we go. Yalla, bye. Good afternoon, Iskandar. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
It was great to see you in London, and now we're in way different places and continents. But still, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the conversation we've had on the lineages of protest in Iran. What would you like to highlight, and how would you like to summarize our conversation for our viewers?
Sure. So, I mean, it was a rather expansive conversation, and really, I think the core of it was looking at these interlocking four systemic crises in the context of Iran, and that these are basically currently being undergone and experienced, but in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And obviously, in that context, we went through. I mean, in our conversation, we went through the crisis of the gender regime, and sort of this broader crisis of social reproduction, and really trying to show how this culturally conservative kind of reassertion is very much interlinked with a specific kind of regime of accumulation under the Islamic Republic. The second kind of crisis that we spoke about was the crisis of the dominative, centralizing, homogenizing kind of nation state, which obviously precedes the Islamic Republic, and obviously how movements for self-determination or greater kind of democratic kind of self-organization, whether it be in Kurdistan or Baluchistan and so on, very much fit into that. And the third crisis is really, I guess, the what we call the sort of the crisis of religious democracy and kind of the dead end of sort of reformism with a capital R in the Islamic Republic, and how that in turn has kind of radicalized demands and protests, and how protests are actually waged and conducted. And the final sort of crisis that we spoke about was sort of this crisis of a kind of authoritarian neoliberalism and a kind of a political economy of basically predation under the Islamic Republic, where we've seen over sort of well over two decades now the increased transfer of kind of the commons, as it were, public wealth, public assets into the hands of not only private hands, but the sort of the parastatal kind of sector, and how this amounts to a kind of a class war from above. So the point of our conversation was really to try and outline and try to speak about and pass how these various crises not only kind of stand alone, but very much intersect and mutually constitute one another, and sort of really highlight the kind of the systemic nature of these crises. And just finally, one point, it was other thing I wanted to kind of highlight was, although these crises are certainly systemic, this doesn't necessarily mean that kind of opposition to the Islamic Republic is going to coalesce into some broader kind of platform that has the capacity to actually be rid of the Islamic Republic. So in a sense, what we're going to see is this kind of long period of crisis and attrition and protest. And I see that's going to be probably ongoing for the foreseeable future, as the state is also able to significantly raise the costs of kind of these confrontational forms of protest as well. And we're going to see that back and forth, I think, for the foreseeable future.
Thanks, Iskandar.
Do you want to go to must reads, or did you want to?
Yeah, let's do some must reads.
Let's talk about things
no,
that
no,
you.
actually, no. We have actually. Let me be very straightforward and say that we recorded this interview with Iskandar in London, and we recorded a few more interviews, mostly together, including with Alain Gresh, which will be posted next week on Europe, the Middle East, and China, of course. Because if you don't say China or put China in
And
any
Ukraine.
and Ukraine, but
Many buzzwords.
sure, in any like public discussion, then you're not with it.
You're irrelevant.
You're irrelevant. So in the meantime, what we did is that we actually had we went on a trip, right? And on the way there, we thought we would record some footage on the way, thinking that it will be interesting.
Did we think it would be interesting, or did we think it would be funny? I did
Yeah.
not think it would be interesting.
I thought it would be
it
interesting.
would be fun.
Like we'll have like a little mini doc, but this is how it proceeded. This is the first one we did, and we were recording it at Dallas Airport while we're leaving, and we were on an escalator, and I happened to be on the lower rung, which it's not great if you understand the height question.
It was important for feminism, though.
If that's how feminism
It is.
triumphs.
It's how it works, actually.
Here we
As
go.
a woman, I can say that.
Wait a minute. So we're at Dallas Airport. No, wait a minute. We're at Dallas Airport. We're trying to. No, wait a minute. We're trying to board the flight right now. I still need one actually. And oh my god, my back.
Oh my god.
Yeah, that's that's how it went for the most part. And the only thing that the only picture that we will show you, because we don't have much time here and we're very serious people, is
I'm so nervous.
where is it? I don't even know where it is.
Iskandar Gresh tour.
Tour. Yeah, here's the only picture where we were in Paris and we were on a bus for half an hour before a train, trying to do some sightseeing.
Wow. Look at those jaw lines. Chiseled. Just kidding. Just kidding. What you don't know in that photo is that we were both so cold. We were both so cold, and we were kind of being whiny about it.
In all cases, we will take a little break and learn a little bit about MESP before we proceed, and then we will be back with must reads.
Now it is our pleasure to tell you what you must read, legally, contractually, as a viewer of this show.
As usual, we will end with a couple must-read recommendations also from our Newton series. There is a conversation with Zenita Karik regarding her new book, Bosnian Hajj Literature, Multiple Paths to the Holy, which was born out of the author's realization that the Hajj is omnipresent in Bosnian cultural production.
Another must-read article is yet another new text out now interview, featuring an interview with Bruce Matty Weitzman about his book Amazigh Politics in the Wake of the Arab Spring, which argues that Amazigh politics constituted an integral part of North Africa's contested politics during the decade of the Arab uprisings. Make sure to check both of those articles out on Jadaliyya. And
Absolutely.
With that, it's a wrap.
We come to the end of our show, covering nearly 2 months of knowledge production in April and part of May. Please be sure to check out the episode digest on Jadaliyya after this later this week for links to all content we covered today. Thank you to all our guests and viewers, and we hope to see you again next month with episode 3.9, where we will be covering the month of May and part of the month of June, and I think that might be our last
season 3
last of the season 3, leaving July and August for the usual September show. which will include a lot of surprises that are so secretive that we don't even know what they are.
We don't even know.
Yeah.
Only time will tell.
And I will leave you with the new list of credits, which I spent a couple of hours putting together on Final Cut Pro so that we could represent the new team that has joined, including many folks, not least Abdullah Tafish. So Abdullah, please take a look if you want to come and take a look
Check our spelling
at the credits, so that you and I actually fix the quality. Shukran. Thanks everybody. Salam.